My best friend sent me a video showing my sister walking around a casino and asked, "Bro, isn't your sister supposed to be paralyzed?" I glanced up from my phone and stared at my sister who sat in a wheelchair right in front of me, just like she had for 2 years. My heart raced. It was impossible. She was shot in the spine during a robbery while on duty as an officer. Labeled the hero cop who jumped in front of a bullet, and there were stitches from the surgery. I rewatched the video showing her at a blackjack table, doing a little dance while she celebrated a win. The timestamp was from last night. I felt my hands shake. "Deborah!" I called out. You can walk?" I turned the phone to her face and played the video. Her face went white, tears started rolling down her cheeks. "Zach?" She called for her caregiver, who quickly emerged and wheeled her away from the living room. "Deborah, wait!" I yelled, trying to chase after her, but the door to her bedroom locked before I could reach her. I stared at the door and tried banging on it twice, but all I received was silence. At home, I tried showing my wife Courtney the video. She squinted, then paused it. "I mean, maybe it's just someone who looks very similar." "Come on, you know she's paralyzed. Every single doctor we've met for the past 2 years confirmed it," she said before placing a kiss to my cheek. "Don't overthink it." But I had to confirm it. So that night after my wife Courtney went to bed, I snuck back to Deborah's house and installed a tiny camera in her living room vent while she slept. I watched the feed from my car and felt my blood turn cold. There she was, my sister Deborah, walking to the kitchen all on her own. Like a bullet never got lodged into her spine. The video continued. I watched the caretaker Zach spreading documents across the table, making notes. And during their break, I watched them break out into a fist fight, dodging and countering like they were part of John Wick. I felt even more stumped. And this time, I needed the truth. I went inside my sister's apartment the next day after I saw Zach step out to grab groceries. I found her in the kitchen and crossed my arms, blocking her way out. "Deborah, how long have you been able to walk?" I asked in an icy voice. Deborah shook her head, trying to wheel her way past me. "Why did you lie to me? We're family. I stuck by you through thick and thin, Deborah. I was here when your ex-husband left. I was here when your child got run over by a bus. I was here when you needed the motivation to do anything." Deborah trembled at my words before breaking out into tears. "I was trying to protect you." She took a deep breath and physically stepped out of the wheelchair. "I had to keep pretending because if I didn't, I knew they'd go after you next." I paused. "Go after me next? What are you even talking about?" I asked. "The bullet that hit me wasn't from the robbery suspect. The angle was all wrong. It came from behind me, just as I stepped in front of you. What I'm trying to say is, someone tried to hurt you that day, not me. You just got lucky, really lucky." I felt my heart race. "Someone was after me? Why?" "There's something else," she said, pulling out a folder full of medical reports, the same ones I saw her discussing with Zach from the camera I hid in the vents. "The killer is still after you." She pointed to one of the documents confirming that there was poison in my blood tests from my last 3 physicals. I pressed my lips together, digging my fingernails into my palm. "You know who it is, don't you?" She frowned and nodded slowly. "That's why Zach is here. He's the detective in charge of investigating you." "Who is it?" I asked quietly. She shook her head. "Just leave it to me and Zach." "No," I interrupted. "Just tell me who." "Your wife. It's your wife, Courtney," she said abruptly before laying out the facts. My wife had taken out a $1 million life insurance policy on me without saying anything. And her partner, the guy who actually shot my sister, was my business partner, TJ. "Why not just arrest them with this?" I asked. Deborah shook her head. "Can't prosecute unless there's a crime being committed. Unfortunately, the bullet I took for you isn't enough. Help us catch her in the act." We set up a sting operation. I went home, pretended to collapse during dinner to make her think the poison she'd been putting in my food was working. Courtney would call 911, playing the panicked wife perfectly. Then at the hospital, after hearing that I was fine, she'd wait until the nurses left me alone before sneaking in to finally finish the job. Everything went perfectly. There I was, pretending to be unconscious at the hospital after collapsing. I kept my eyes closed and my breathing steady as Courtney walked over to my bed. She picked up the pillow from the chair and held it over my face. "Should have died 2 years ago," she whispered. "Freeze!" 2 officers flooded into the room. Courtney dropped the pillow and spun around to find herself surrounded. And for a second, I thought we'd won. But then one of the officers turned his gun towards me and grinned. It was TJ, my business partner. "I missed once. What are the odds I miss again?" The 2 real officers stood frozen, their guns drawn but aimed at nothing specific, while TJ kept his weapon trained on my chest. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, just watched as his finger rested on the trigger like he was deciding whether to finish what he started 2 years ago. The door crashed open and Deborah burst through in her wheelchair, Zach right behind her pushing hard. She was screaming my name over and over, her voice raw with panic, and TJ's eyes flicked toward her for just a second before he grabbed Courtney by her hair and yanked her in front of him like a shield. Courtney yelped in pain and tried to twist away, but he had her locked tight against his chest, the gun now pressed against her temple instead of pointed at me. One of the real officers, a younger guy with sweat pouring down his face, tried to step forward, but TJ shook his head and backed toward the window. The other officer was older, calmer, and he held up one hand while keeping his weapon steady. Nobody knew who to trust, or who the real threat was, and I could see the confusion written all over their faces as they tried to figure out if TJ was actually a cop or something else entirely. My hand shot out and slammed down on the emergency call button mounted to the bed rail, hitting it 3 times fast before TJ realized what I was doing. Alarms started blaring throughout the entire floor, a sharp electronic shriek that made everyone flinch except TJ. He swung his gun toward the ceiling and fired once, the shot so loud in the small room that my ears started ringing immediately. Ceiling tiles exploded and rained down in chunks of white dust and debris, while nurses came running from every direction down the hallway. In the chaos of bodies and shouting and the alarm still screaming, TJ shoved Courtney hard toward the 2 officers, and she stumbled forward into the younger one's arms. He went down under her weight, and his gun clattered across the floor while TJ spun and crashed through the doorway into the packed hallway. People were screaming and diving out of the way as he bulldozed through them, knocking over a medication cart that went sliding into the wall with a metallic crash. I tried to sit up, but my legs were tangled in the sheets, and by the time I got free, he was already gone around a corner. Zach took off after TJ without saying a word, just launched himself out of the room at a full sprint, while the older officer tackled Courtney to the ground right there in the doorway. She hit the floor hard and started screaming that TJ forced her into everything, that she never wanted to hurt me, that he threatened her family and made her do it all. Her voice was high and desperate and kept breaking into sobs while the officer yanked her arms behind her back and slapped handcuffs on her wrists. The younger officer was back on his feet now, talking fast into his radio about shots fired, an officer needs assistance, and a suspect fleeing on foot. I was shaking so hard I thought I might fall out of the bed, just watching my wife face down on the hospital floor in handcuffs while she cried and begged and tried to make excuses. The older officer hauled her up to her feet, and she looked at me with mascara running down her face in black streaks, her mouth moving like she wanted to say something but no words coming out. Hospital security hit the lockdown button exactly 90 seconds after TJ fired that shot, and I heard the heavy magnetic locks slam into place on every exit throughout the building. Metal security gates started rolling down over doorways, and a computerized voice came over the intercom announcing a code silver, active threat, all staff and visitors shelter in place. TJ had already disappeared into the service corridors by then, those back hallways that staff used to move supplies and equipment without getting in the way of patients. The younger officer who TJ's shot had grazed was sitting against the wall, now getting bandaged by a nurse who kept telling him to hold still. Blood was seeping through his uniform sleeve, but he looked more angry than hurt. His jaw clenched tight while he radioed descriptions to responding units. Male, 6'2", 200 pounds, brown hair, wearing a patrol uniform with badge number 473. Armed and dangerous, shots fired, officer down. The nurse wrapped gauze around his arm in quick, efficient movements, and he never stopped talking into his radio the whole time. Deborah wheeled over to my bedside fast enough that the chair's wheels squeaked on the linoleum floor and grabbed my hand in both of hers. Tears were streaming down her face, and she kept saying she was sorry, that she never thought TJ would be dirty enough to steal a badge and infiltrate the sting operation. Her hands were shaking as bad as mine, and I could feel her pulse racing through her palms where they pressed against my wrist. I wanted to tell her it wasn't her fault, but my throat was too tight to get words out, so I just squeezed her hand back and tried to breathe. Zach came back about 10 minutes later looking furious and empty-handed, his face red from running and his shirt soaked with sweat. He explained between gasping breaths that TJ knew the hospital layout way too well, that he'd escaped through a loading dock that connected to the parking garage before perimeter units could get into position. The exits were locked down now, but TJ had already made it outside the secure zone, probably had a car waiting somewhere close. Zach punched the wall hard enough to leave a dent in the drywall and swore under his breath while Deborah just kept crying and holding my hand. They tried to question Courtney right there in the hallway, but she invoked her right to an attorney the second they asked her anything beyond her name. The words came out mechanical like she'd practiced them, and the older officer just nodded and stopped asking questions immediately. A detective showed up maybe 5 minutes later, a tall guy in his 40s with gray starting at his temples and tired eyes that had seen way too much. He introduced himself as Detective Aiden Goodwin and told me we'd all need to give formal statements, but right now the priority was securing the scene and processing evidence from the failed sting. He had this calm, professional way of talking that made me feel slightly less like I was about to throw up, and he posted an officer outside my room before heading down the hallway to coordinate with hospital security. I could hear him on his phone talking about crime scene techs and evidence collection and getting the hospital cameras pulled for review. I spent the next 3 hours sitting in a small interview room, giving my statement to Aiden while a recorder ran on the table between us. He asked me to start from the beginning, from when I first saw the casino video of Deborah walking, and I talked until my throat was raw trying to explain everything. Meanwhile, hospital security was reviewing camera footage in their office down the hall, and eventually they found video showing TJ's entry through a service entrance, using what looked like completely legitimate police credentials. The timestamp showed him arriving 20 minutes before the sting went down. Plenty of time to get into position and wait for his moment. Zach sat in on part of my interview and admitted he felt responsible for not anticipating a partner betrayal this deep, that he should have considered the possibility of dirty cops being involved. Aiden told him that dirty cops are every detective's blind spot, that nobody wants to believe their own people could be corrupt, and that's exactly what makes them so dangerous. The conversation went in circles for a while before Aiden finally said we'd done enough for tonight and let me go. By 2 a.m, they released me from the hospital with instructions to stay somewhere safe while they hunted for TJ. I didn't want to go home, couldn't imagine sleeping in the bed I'd shared with Courtney knowing what she'd tried to do, so Deborah insisted I come to her apartment. We walked out to the parking garage together, and this time she actually walked. No wheelchair, no pretending, just my sister on her own 2 feet like the past 2 years never happened. Zach had her wheelchair folded up in the trunk of his car, and we all climbed in without saying much. The drive took maybe 15 minutes through empty streets, and the whole time I kept checking the mirrors expecting to see TJ following us. When we got to Deborah's building, Zach walked us all the way to her door and checked inside before he'd let us enter, moving through each room with his hand on his gun until he was satisfied nobody was hiding there. I couldn't sleep even though I was exhausted down to my bones, just sat on Deborah's couch staring at nothing while she made coffee in the kitchen. The smell of it brewing was familiar and normal and completely wrong for everything that had just happened. She brought me a mug and sat down next to me and finally started explaining everything about her recovery and the investigation. She'd been working with Zach for 18 months after realizing the bullet trajectory didn't match the robbery suspect's position, that the angle was all wrong for someone shooting from where he'd been standing. They'd been slowly building a case while she maintained her paralysis cover to keep me safe, gathering evidence and watching Courtney and TJ without tipping them off. The physical therapy had been brutal, relearning to walk while pretending she couldn't, and every time she saw me, she had to act like her legs didn't work. She cried while she told me this, and I cried too, both of us just sitting there on her couch drinking coffee and trying to process everything that had fallen apart tonight. Zach got a call from Aiden around 9 the next morning, saying they needed to loop in internal affairs because TJ's badge access shouldn't have been possible without inside help. Someone in the department either gave him credentials or looked the other way while he got them, which meant they couldn't trust normal police channels until they figured out who the leak was. Helena Goodwin from Iowa showed up at Deborah's apartment by noon, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who didn't waste time on small talk. She interviewed all 3 of us about how TJ obtained police credentials and knew exactly when to show up at the hospital, taking notes in a small leather notebook and asking follow-up questions that made it clear she didn't miss anything. By the time she left 2 hours later, I felt wrung out and empty, like there was nothing left inside me except the knowledge that my wife had tried to kill me and my business partner had almost succeeded. Helena packed up her notebook and stood from Deborah's kitchen table, then turned to face all 3 of us with her arms crossed. She explained that someone inside the department either gave TJ a badge or looked the other way while he got one, which meant we couldn't trust normal police channels until they figured out who the leak was. She pulled out her phone and made 2 calls right there in front of us, speaking in clipped tones about vetted officers and surveillance assignments. Within 30 minutes, 2 plainclothes officers arrived at Deborah's building and positioned themselves in an unmarked car across the street. Helena pointed them out through the window and told us they'd rotate shifts every 12 hours until the internal investigation found the source of TJ's access. I watched those officers settle into their car and felt my stomach twist because now I couldn't look at any cop without wondering if they were dirty too. Every uniform became a potential threat, every badge a possible fake, and the paranoia dug into my brain like hooks I couldn't shake loose. Helena left around 3 that afternoon, and hospital security called Zach an hour later with footage they'd pulled from the service corridors. We huddled around Zach's laptop watching grainy video of TJ walking through a restricted hallway that required keycard access, wearing a patrol uniform that looked completely real down to the equipment belt and radio. The timestamp showed him entering 20 minutes before the sting operation went down, moving with confidence like he belonged there. Helena came back to review the footage herself and froze the frame on TJ's chest where his badge number was visible. She wrote down the number and made another call, then her face went hard when she got the answer. The badge belonged to an officer who retired 6 months ago, she told us, which meant someone either stole those credentials or TJ had connections way deeper than anyone thought. I felt cold realizing how long he'd been planning this, how many pieces he'd put in place while I trusted him as my business partner. Assistant District Attorney Philip Rawlings called Zach's phone the next morning, and Zach put it on speaker so I could listen while Philip laid out the prosecution challenges we were facing. His voice sounded tired even through the phone as he explained that the attempted smothering was solid evidence with 2 officer witnesses who saw Courtney holding the pillow over my face, but the poison evidence had problems. I'd been getting regular physicals from my normal doctor who had no reason to preserve blood samples for criminal investigation, so the chain of custody had gaps that defense attorneys would attack. Philip kept using legal terms I barely understood, but the message came through clear enough. We had some strong evidence and some weak evidence, and Courtney's lawyer would focus on poking holes in the weak parts. Philip continued talking, and his tone got even more serious when he started explaining what Courtney's attorney would argue in court. They'd claim she was forced into everything by TJ and never actually hurt me herself, playing the victim card while TJ's escape made him look guilty, but also meant we couldn't question him about who else might be involved. I pressed my hand against my stomach, feeling sick, as Philip listed all the legal ways they could wiggle out of charges despite everything they'd done. The attempted smothering might get reduced to assault, the conspiracy charges might not stick without TJ to corroborate details, and the poison evidence might get thrown out entirely if the judge agreed about chain of custody issues. Zach thanked Philip for the update and ended the call. Then we all sat there in Deborah's living room not saying anything because what was there to say? 2 days later, a toxicology specialist named Lloyd Ainsworth showed up at Deborah's apartment carrying a thick folder of my medical records. He spread papers across the coffee table and pointed to highlighted sections showing chemical compounds in my blood work from 3 different physicals over the past 18 months. Lloyd explained in careful detail that the poison matched a rare industrial chemical used in manufacturing processes, not something you could buy at a regular store. The dosing pattern suggested someone with basic chemistry knowledge who was trying to cause organ failure slowly enough that it would look like natural causes, he said, while tracing his finger across a chart showing how the levels increased over time. My hands shook looking at those numbers and realizing how close I'd come to dying without ever knowing someone was poisoning me. My attorney Adriana Chavez arrived that afternoon after Philip recommended her, a sharp woman in her 40s who got right to business without any small talk. She sat me down at Deborah's kitchen table and opened her briefcase, pulling out documents about surveillance laws and evidence admissibility. Adriana explained in plain terms that the hidden camera I installed in Deborah's vent could become a major problem for our case, even though it revealed important information. I'd technically broken surveillance laws by recording in someone's home without their permission, she said, and defense attorneys would use that to attack my credibility and maybe even get evidence thrown out. I tried to argue that I needed to know the truth, but Adriana cut me off, telling me that judges care about legal procedure more than good intentions, and we needed to prepare for the camera footage being challenged in court. Deborah got called in for her own administrative inquiry the next day about hiding her recovery from the department. She came home 6 hours later looking completely drained and angrier than I'd seen her in years. She dropped into her wheelchair even though we were alone and told me her lieutenant suspended her while they investigated why she faked a disability for 2 years. The department saw it as lying about her medical status to collect benefits, she explained with her voice shaking, even though she'd been working with Zach on an active investigation the whole time. I watched my sister who took a bullet meant for me get punished for trying to protect me and felt rage building in my chest at how unfair everything had become. Zach pulled me aside later that evening when Deborah went to take a shower. He admitted quietly that he was worried about information leaks inside the department after seeing how TJ got badge access, so he'd been keeping details split up even from his usual partners. Zach looked me in the eyes and asked me to be extremely careful about who I talked to and what I said over the phone, because if there was a leak, then TJ probably knew we were hunting for him. I promised to be careful, but the paranoia got worse after that conversation, making me second-guess every interaction and wonder if someone was listening to everything I did. The news broke the following morning when a local website ran a story with the headline, "Hero Cop Who Can Walk," and detailed photos of Deborah at the casino. I found out when my phone started getting calls from numbers I didn't recognize, reporters trying to get comments about the scandal. Deborah saw the article on her laptop and started crying, devastated that her sacrifice to protect me was twisted into a story about disability fraud while the actual murder conspiracy got buried under the sensational angle. The article barely mentioned Courtney or TJ or the fact that someone tried to kill me, focusing instead on how much money Deborah collected in benefits during her fake paralysis. I sat next to my sister while she cried and felt helpless watching her get destroyed publicly for trying to save my life. Courtney's bail hearing happened that same afternoon, and I drove to the courthouse with Zach, taking a seat in the back of the courtroom where I could see everything. Philip argued that Courtney was a flight risk who attempted murder and should stay in custody, but her attorney stood up in an expensive suit and painted her as a victim of TJ's manipulation with no prior criminal record. The judge listened to both sides and set bail at $200,000 with ankle monitoring, then banged his gavel before I could process what was happening. I watched in complete disbelief as Courtney's parents posted bond 2 hours later, and she walked out of the courthouse that evening wearing the ankle monitor but otherwise free. She looked right at me as she left with her parents, and I saw something cold in her eyes that made me understand she didn't regret any of it. She was just sorry she got caught. That night, I couldn't go back to the house knowing Courtney might show up there despite the ankle monitor. Deborah drove me to an extended-stay hotel on the edge of town and helped me pack essentials from my car. She grabbed my laptop bag while I carried a duffel with clothes and toiletries. Zach made calls to arrange patrol checks on the hotel location every few hours. The front desk clerk barely looked up as I checked in for an indefinite stay. My room was on the third floor with a view of the parking lot and a kitchenette I knew I wouldn't use. I dropped my bags on the bed and opened my laptop to check work emails. The inbox was flooded with messages from clients. Most of them asked vague questions about rumors they'd heard. A few were more direct about whether they should find a new vendor. I watched my professional reputation collapse in real time as I scrolled through 43 unread messages. One client had already sent a cancellation notice for a contract worth $30,000 annually. Another asked if the business was even still operational given the circumstances. I closed the laptop without responding to any of them because I didn't know what to say that wouldn't make things worse. The forensic accountant called on day 5 while I was drinking hotel coffee that tasted like cardboard. She introduced herself as the investigator assigned to examine my business records. Her voice was professional and detached as she explained what she'd found. Funds had been siphoned from company accounts over the past 8 months. The total came to nearly $80,000 transferred to an offshore account. She traced the account to a shell company that appeared connected to TJ through matching registration addresses. My hands started shaking as she walked me through the evidence. TJ had been stealing from our business for months while planning to kill me for insurance money. The accountant asked if I had any knowledge of these transfers, and I told her no. She said she'd send her full report to the prosecutor and investigators within 48 hours. I sat on the hotel bed after the call ended and stared at the wall for 20 minutes trying to process that my business partner had been robbing me blind while poisoning me. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. The text was encrypted and told me to keep my mouth shut or else. I screenshot it immediately and called Zach. He arrived at the hotel within 30 minutes and examined my phone. He said he'd need to trace the number through the carrier and see if they could identify the device. Helena joined us an hour later and added the threatening message to the evidence file. She explained they couldn't prove TJ sent it without catching him with the actual burner phone. The message had come from a prepaid device purchased with cash at a convenience store. No security footage was available from the purchase because the store's cameras had been broken for weeks. Zach looked frustrated as he handed my phone back. He told me to forward any other messages immediately and not to respond to anything suspicious. Helena made notes in her file and said the threat could be used as evidence of witness intimidation if they ever caught TJ with the phone. Adriana filed for a protective order against both Courtney and TJ on day 5. I met her at the courthouse and signed the paperwork in a small office that smelled like old files. She explained the order would legally prohibit them from coming near me or contacting me. The judge reviewed the filing that afternoon given the attempted murder charge. He granted it immediately and set the boundaries at 500 feet. Adriana walked me through what the order meant in practical terms. If either of them violated it by coming near me, police could arrest them on the spot. But enforcement depended on officers actually catching them in violation. She said the order gave us legal grounds for their arrest, but didn't guarantee my safety. I signed the acknowledgement forms and left the courthouse feeling slightly more protected, but not actually safe. The protective order was just paper unless someone was there to enforce it when I needed help. Lloyd called with an update that same evening. He'd been working to trace the poison compound found in my blood work. His research identified a specialty chemical supplier that required business credentials to purchase the specific substance. He was filing subpoenas for their sales records to identify who bought it. The process could take 2 weeks because the supplier operated in a different state with complex privacy regulations. Lloyd sounded optimistic that the records would give us direct evidence linking Courtney or TJ to procurement of the poison. He explained that proving purchase of the substance would be crucial for the attempted murder charges. Right now, they had evidence of poison in my system, but no clear chain showing who bought it or administered it. The supplier records could finally close that gap and tie one of them directly to the weapon used. I thanked him for the update and marked 2 weeks on my phone calendar for when we might finally have that breakthrough evidence. Helena's investigation identified the patrol officer whose badge number TJ had used at the hospital. She brought him in for questioning on day 6 at police headquarters. I wasn't present for the interview, but Zach filled me in afterward. The officer claimed his credentials were stolen from his locker during his final week before retirement 6 months ago. He said he'd reported the theft to his supervisor at the time, but no formal investigation happened. Helena was skeptical about the timing because TJ couldn't have planned the hospital sting 6 months in advance. She started investigating the retired officer's finances, looking for signs of payment from TJ. Bank records would take time to subpoena, but she wanted to rule out whether he'd sold the badge rather than had it stolen. Zach said Helena was thorough and wouldn't let the investigation stop at a convenient story. If the officer had been paid off, she'd find the evidence in his financial records and charge him with selling police credentials. Zach spent hours on day 6 reviewing body cam footage from the hospital sting. He called me that evening with news that made me feel slightly better about the case. The footage had clear audio of Courtney saying those exact words while holding the pillow over my face. The recording captured her voice without any distortion or background noise. Philip confirmed this was strong evidence of intent and premeditation when Zach shared it with the prosecutor's office. Even if the poison evidence had chain of custody problems, the body cam footage showed Courtney actively trying to kill me with multiple officers as witnesses. Philip said this strengthened the attempted murder charge significantly because it proved she was trying to finish what the poison had started. The audio would be hard for any defense attorney to explain away. Zach sounded satisfied as he walked me through how the footage would be used at trial. I felt relief knowing there was at least one piece of solid evidence that couldn't be disputed or explained away by her lawyers. Deborah and I had a difficult conversation on day 7. She came to my hotel room and we sat across from each other at the small table near the window. I told her I needed her to stop keeping secrets even when she thought she was protecting me. She agreed and apologized again for maintaining the paralysis cover for so long. She explained that pretending she couldn't walk had been eating her alive. Every time she saw me, she wanted to tell the truth, but believed it was the only way to investigate without tipping off whoever was after me. If Courtney or TJ knew she could walk and was actively investigating, they might have accelerated their plans or disappeared entirely. Deborah's eyes filled with tears as she talked about the weight of lying to me for 2 years. I understood her reasoning, but told her I needed honesty going forward, no matter how hard the truth was to hear. She promised to keep me informed about the investigation and her own situation with the department. We hugged before she left, and it felt like we were finally rebuilding trust through transparency instead of protection through secrets. A search warrant on TJ's office got executed that afternoon while I was still at the hotel. Zach called me with the update around 4 o'clock. Investigators had found burner phone packaging in TJ's desk drawer. There were handwritten notes about my schedule, including times I usually left work and routes I drove home. They also discovered a folder containing printouts of the life insurance policy Courtney had taken out on me. The documents had highlighting and margin notes discussing payout timelines and beneficiary requirements. Zach's voice carried satisfaction as he walked me through each piece of evidence. He said they were finally building a solid evidence chain that connected TJ directly to the conspiracy. The notes about my schedule proved surveillance and planning. The insurance policy documents showed his knowledge of the financial motive. The burner phone packaging potentially linked him to the threatening message I'd received. Everything was coming together to prove this wasn't just Courtney acting alone, but a coordinated conspiracy between her and my business partner. On day 8, the chemical supplier's records finally arrived at Lloyd's office. He called me that morning to confirm what we'd been hoping to find. A purchase matching the poison compound had been made 6 months ago using a credit card in Courtney's name. The records showed the exact chemical formula, quantity purchased, and shipping address that matched our home. Lloyd had already forwarded everything to Philip and the investigative team. Philip called me an hour later to explain this was the breakthrough we'd been waiting for. The purchase records directly tied Courtney to procurement of the weapon used in the attempted murder. Her defense attorneys couldn't claim she was coerced by TJ when she was the one who bought the poison months before the hospital incident. The evidence showed premeditation and planning on her part, independent of whatever TJ had done. Philip sounded confident as he explained how this evidence would be used at trial. Between the body cam footage, the purchase records, and the insurance policy, they had a strong case proving Courtney had planned and attempted to murder me for financial gain. That afternoon, my phone started ringing, and I stared at the screen showing Courtney's name. Adriana sat across from me at the hotel room desk reviewing paperwork, and she looked up when she heard the ringtone. She grabbed my phone and opened the recording app before handing it back. I hit answer and put it on speaker. Courtney's voice came through shaky and crying. She said TJ forced her into everything by threatening to hurt her parents and her sister. She begged me to tell Philip she was scared and didn't want to hurt me. She kept saying she had no choice and TJ would have killed her family if she didn't help him. I stayed quiet while Adriana took notes and Courtney kept crying and asking me to please help her make a deal with the prosecutor. After 3 minutes, Adriana pointed at the phone and made a cutting motion across her throat. I told Courtney I needed to go and ended the call. Adriana saved the recording and sent it straight to Philip with a message explaining Courtney violated the protective order by calling me directly. Helena called Zach an hour later with news about her investigation. She identified a second officer who sent TJ a text message with my hospital room number 20 minutes before the sting operation happened. She brought him in for questioning that afternoon, and he admitted everything within an hour. He said TJ paid him $5,000 in cash to provide the room number. The officer claimed he thought TJ just needed it to serve divorce papers, and he didn't know anything about a murder plot. Helena didn't believe him, but the officer stuck to his story and said he would never have helped if he knew someone was going to get hurt. Philip told Zach the officer would face charges for obstruction and accepting bribes even if his divorce paper excuse was true. The next morning, Helena called me directly to explain what hospital administration found while reviewing visitor logs from my stays over the past year. They discovered multiple entries that had been altered or deleted from the system. Someone with access to the hospital computers had been covering tracks and helping TJ watch my movements. Helena said she was expanding her investigation to include everyone who worked in the hospital security office. I felt sick knowing they had been watching me for months while I thought I was safe getting my regular checkups. Every doctor visit and every time I stayed overnight for tests, someone had been feeding information to TJ about where I was and when I would be alone. Helena promised to find whoever helped him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been completely exposed without knowing it. Day 9 arrived and Lloyd went to testify before the grand jury about the poison evidence. He spent 3 hours walking them through his analysis of the chemical compound and the procurement records showing Courtney's purchase. Philip called me that afternoon sounding excited. The grand jury returned indictments against both Courtney and TJ for attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and fraud related to the life insurance policy. Philip explained that indictments meant the grand jury found enough evidence to move forward with criminal charges, and now we could proceed to trial. He said the attempted murder charge carried a possible sentence of 20 years, and the conspiracy charge added another 10 years on top of that. I asked what happened next, and Philip said he would reach out to Courtney's attorney with a plea offer. The next day, Philip called Courtney's attorney and offered a deal. Courtney would have to cooperate fully against TJ, including testimony about how the conspiracy started and where TJ was hiding now. In exchange, Philip would recommend a reduced sentence instead of taking her to trial on all charges. Her attorney said they needed time to think about it and discuss options with Courtney. Philip gave them 48 hours before the offer expired, and he proceeded to trial on everything. I spent that evening staring at my laptop trying to figure out how to save my business, but the numbers didn't work. Day 10 arrived, and I got an email from my bank saying my business accounts were partially frozen while the forensic investigation continued. I couldn't access enough money to make payroll for my 3 employees. I called each of them that morning and explained that the company was under criminal investigation because of TJ's theft. I had to lay them off temporarily until the accounts got unfrozen and the investigation finished. They all understood, but I could hear the worry in their voices about finding new jobs and paying their bills. I watched my professional life fall apart because TJ had stolen from the company and dragged my name into a murder scandal. Every client who heard the news would think I was involved somehow. That afternoon, I walked out to my car in the hotel parking lot to grab my charger from the front seat. A dark sedan came around the corner going way too fast and headed straight for me. I dove between 2 parked cars and hit the pavement hard while the sedan sped past where I had been standing 2 seconds earlier. My hands were scraped and bleeding and my shoulder hurt from the impact. Hotel security came running and helped me up while other guests called the police. The security cameras captured the whole thing, including a clear shot of the license plate. Aiden showed up 30 minutes later and ran the plate through the system. The car was registered to a rental company and had been paid for using a credit card from one of TJ's shell companies. Aiden assigned an officer to watch the hotel parking lot and told me to stay inside as much as possible. Deborah showed up that evening and knocked on my hotel room door. She came in and sat on the couch while I made coffee. We talked for hours about our childhood and how we ended up in this situation with her faking being in a wheelchair and me almost getting murdered by my own wife. She told me about her physical therapy over the past 2 years and how hard it was to pretend she couldn't walk every single time she saw me. She said there were moments when she almost told me the truth because lying to me felt worse than the bullet wound. She described doing exercises in her apartment late at night and having to stop whenever she heard footsteps in the hallway. She talked about the first time she stood up after 6 months of recovery and how she cried because she thought she would never walk again. I told her I understood why she did it, even though it hurt to know she kept such a huge secret. We hugged and she promised to keep being honest with me no matter what happened next. Day 11 started with Adriana calling me before I finished breakfast. She said I needed to promise not to try contacting TJ directly, no matter how angry I got. She explained that anything I did could mess up the criminal case against him. Defense attorneys would use any mistake I made to argue that their clients were the real victims and I was the one causing problems. She said I needed to let law enforcement handle everything, even though it felt way too slow and frustrating. I promised to stay away from TJ and let Aiden and Helena do their jobs. That evening, Zach showed up at my hotel room with his laptop. He opened a folder of surveillance photos from earlier that day, showing TJ meeting with someone at a parking garage downtown. The photos clearly showed them exchanging something that looked like a gun or maybe a knife. Zach said Aiden got a warrant for the parking garage location within an hour. Officers searched the area and found a storage locker TJ had been renting under a fake name. Inside the locker, they discovered a fake passport with TJ's photo, but a different name. They also found an airline confirmation for a flight to Mexico, scheduled for 3 days from now. Zach showed me copies of everything and said TJ was planning to run before his trial date. Aiden put out alerts to every airport and border crossing to watch for TJ using either his real name or the fake passport identity. Next morning, I got a call from my own number and my hands started shaking before I even answered it. TJ's voice came through the speaker screaming about how I destroyed everything we built together and ruined his entire life. I kept him talking, asking him why he did it and what he thought would happen, while Aiden stood next to me making hand signals to keep the conversation going. TJ yelled about Courtney promising him half the insurance money and how the business was failing anyway, so why shouldn't he get paid for fixing the problem? I watched Aiden's tech guy working on a laptop with headphones on, tracking the cell signal while I asked TJ more questions about when they started planning this. The tech guy held up 5 fingers, then pointed at his screen and Aiden nodded, writing something on a notepad that said waterfront area. TJ kept ranting about how I never appreciated his contributions to the company and always took credit for his ideas, which wasn't even true, but I didn't argue because the tech guy was still working. After about 8 minutes, the tech guy circled something on a map, showing a commercial zone near the waterfront with a bunch of warehouses and storage facilities. Aiden grabbed his radio and started calling for tactical units to respond to that location, while I kept TJ talking by asking about the poison and how he got Courtney to go along with everything. Tactical officers arrived at the waterfront location within 20 minutes, and I watched from the police station as Aiden coordinated the response over multiple radio channels. They set up a perimeter around 3 warehouses and 2 garage buildings, checking each structure systematically, while I sat in a conference room feeling useless. One of the tactical guys radioed that they found TJ's rental car parked behind a garage, and Aiden ordered everyone to hold position and wait for more backup. I heard radio chatter about movement inside the garage, and then someone yelling that there was a hostage situation. My stomach twisted when Aiden explained that TJ had grabbed a maintenance worker who was servicing equipment in one of the garage bays. The tactical commander requested a hostage negotiator, and Aiden made the call while I sat there thinking about how someone else might get hurt because of me. The negotiator arrived 30 minutes later, and I listened to radio updates about her trying to establish contact with TJ through a phone they slid under the garage door. TJ refused to pick up the phone for the first hour, and I felt sick watching the clock tick forward while that maintenance worker stayed trapped inside with a guy who'd already shot a cop and tried to kill me twice. The standoff dragged on for 3 full hours, and I spent most of that time pacing around the conference room while Zach brought me coffee I couldn't drink. The negotiator finally got TJ talking around the 2-hour mark, and I listened to her calm voice over the radio, asking about his needs and trying to build rapport. TJ demanded a car and safe passage to the border, which the negotiator said she'd work on while really just buying time for tactical to get better positions. Around hour 3, TJ started talking about how tired he was and how he never meant for things to get this bad, which the negotiator said was a good sign he was coming down from his rage. She convinced him that releasing the hostage would show good faith and help his case with prosecutors, and after another 20 minutes of back and forth, TJ finally let the maintenance worker go. The guy came stumbling out of the garage looking scared but unhurt, and tactical officers grabbed him and pulled him to safety. 10 minutes later, TJ walked out with his hands up and tactical swarmed him, putting him face down on the concrete and cuffing him while I watched through Aiden's phone screen. Zach texted me a photo of TJ in handcuffs being loaded into a police transport van, and I felt my legs go weak with relief. I sat down hard in the conference room chair and put my head in my hands, trying to process that they'd actually caught him and nobody else got seriously hurt. TJ's attorney showed up at the police station within an hour, trying to negotiate before they'd even finished booking him. I watched through a window as the attorney sat with Philip in an interview room, offering to name whoever leaked information from internal affairs in exchange for reduced charges. The attorney also claimed TJ had information about other corrupt officers and could help clean up the department if they'd work with him. Philip listened to everything with his arms crossed and then explained that TJ was facing decades in prison for attempted murder of a police officer on top of attempted murder of me, plus kidnapping for the hostage situation. He said any deal would require complete cooperation, including testimony against Courtney, and full disclosure of everyone involved in the conspiracy. The attorney tried to argue that TJ was just a businessman who got in over his head and made bad decisions under pressure, but Philip shut that down by listing all the premeditated actions, including stealing police credentials and planning multiple murder attempts over 2 years. I left before the meeting ended because I couldn't stand being in the same building as TJ's attorney, trying to make excuses for everything he'd done. Helena interviewed TJ the next day with his attorney present, and the session lasted 6 hours, according to Zach, who texted me updates throughout. TJ confirmed that the retired officer whose badge number he used had sold the credentials to him for $10,000 in cash. The retired officer claimed his badge was stolen, but TJ had text messages proving they'd arranged the sale at a diner 3 months before the hospital incident. Helena filed charges against the retired officer for theft of police property and sale of official credentials, which carried serious prison time even for someone who'd already left the force. The department started reviewing other recent retirements to check for similar breaches, and Helena said they found 2 more cases where badges went missing right before officers retired. TJ also admitted he'd paid the patrol officer $5,000 to leak my hospital room number, which Helena already knew but needed confirmation for prosecution. The interview recording showed TJ trying to minimize his role by claiming Courtney masterminded everything, and he just went along with it. But the evidence clearly showed he'd been involved from the beginning, including the shot that hit Deborah 2 years ago. 3 weeks later, Philip called to tell me Courtney's plea deal was finalized. She agreed to testify against TJ in exchange for 15 years for attempted murder with possibility of parole after 10 years. Philip explained this was actually a reasonable outcome, given how strong the evidence was against her, and her cooperation would make sure TJ couldn't claim he acted alone or that she was the real victim. I asked if 15 years was enough for someone who spent 2 years poisoning me, and Philip said the alternative was going to trial where she might get acquitted on some charges if her attorney convinced a jury she was coerced. He said this way we guaranteed she'd serve serious time and couldn't change her story later to help TJ. Adriana agreed with Philip's assessment when I called her afterward, though she understood why it felt wrong that Courtney might get out in 10 years while I'd spend the rest of my life dealing with what she did to me. TJ got held without bail after his attorney's negotiation attempt failed, and the judge reviewed his case. The judge looked at TJ's 2 escape attempts, the hostage situation, and the assault on multiple officers during the hospital incident, and decided he was too dangerous to release. TJ's trial date got set for 6 months out, and Philip felt confident about getting convictions on all counts. He had overwhelming physical evidence, including the hospital body cam footage, Courtney's testimony, the poison procurement records, the stolen badge, and TJ's own admissions during Helena's interview. Philip said the only real question was whether TJ would take a plea deal once he realized how bad his situation was, or if he'd force us all to go through a trial where Courtney would have to testify about everything they'd planned together. 4 weeks after the hospital incident, I filed for divorce, and Adriana handled all the paperwork while I tried to process the reality that my wife had spent 2 years slowly poisoning me. The protective order got extended through the divorce proceedings, and I requested that all contact go through attorneys, so I'd never have to see or speak to Courtney again. Adriana said the divorce would be straightforward since Courtney was in jail and wouldn't contest anything, plus the attempted murder charge meant I had grounds that no judge would question. I signed papers dividing our assets and giving up any claim to things I didn't want to fight over, just wanting the whole process finished as fast as possible. My name came off the house deed and the car titles and every other piece of paperwork that tied me to Courtney, and each signature felt like cutting another thread connecting me to someone who'd tried to kill me. Deborah's administrative case got resolved after Internal Affairs confirmed she was working an active investigation under Zach's supervision the whole time. She received a formal reprimand for not properly documenting her undercover status with the department and got suspended without pay for 3 months. The suspension hurt her financially, but she avoided criminal charges for disability fraud and got to keep her job, which was the best outcome given how bad it could have been. Deborah told me she'd expected worse and was relieved the department recognized she'd been protecting an active investigation rather than just lying for personal benefit. She still had to go through more physical therapy and evaluations before they'd clear her for full duty, but at least her career wasn't completely destroyed by the 2 years she spent pretending to be paralyzed to protect me. 6 weeks after the hospital incident, I got called to testify before the grand jury and spent 4 hours recounting everything from finding the casino video through the failed sting operation. I sat in a witness chair answering questions from Philip and the grand jury members about my relationship with Courtney, the business partnership with TJ, and every detail of how I discovered the conspiracy. They asked about the hidden camera I installed in Deborah's apartment, and I admitted it was probably illegal, but explained I needed to confirm what I'd seen in the casino video. Philip showed them the footage of Courtney holding the pillow over my face, and the grand jury members looked horrified listening to her whisper that I should have died 2 years ago. I described finding the poison in my medical records and learning that TJ had shot Deborah while actually aiming at me, watching several grand jury members take notes while I talked. After I finished testifying, Philip walked me out and said my testimony was strong and credible, and the grand jury seemed appropriately horrified by how long the conspiracy had been going on and how close Courtney and TJ had come to succeeding. 2 months later, the forensic accountant's final report landed on my desk, showing TJ had stolen over $100,000 through fake vendor invoices and diverted payments. I stared at the numbers feeling sick because I'd trusted him completely and never checked the books myself. My 3 employees quit within a week after the news broke, and client after client sent termination emails saying they couldn't work with a company tied to an attempted murder case. I spent a weekend going through all the paperwork and realized I couldn't afford to keep the business running alone, even if clients stayed. The rent on the office space, the equipment leases, the insurance costs all added up to more than I could handle without TJ's half of the income. I filed the dissolution paperwork on a Tuesday morning and watched the clerk stamp it approved, officially ending the company I'd spent 6 years building. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt like I'd lost everything in 2 months. My wife, my business partner, my career, all gone because people I trusted wanted me dead. A former colleague named Danilo called me that same week and said he had contract work available if I needed it. He'd heard about everything through the industry gossip, but told me he didn't care about the scandal as long as I could do the job. The pay was almost half what I used to make, and there was zero job security since contracts could end any time. But I needed income to cover my hotel costs while I figured out my next move. I took the first contract doing basic data analysis work that felt beneath my skill level, but at least kept me busy during the day. The work was mind-numbing compared to running my own business, but every paycheck meant I could afford another week at the hotel and another week of not being homeless. I picked up a second contract through another connection doing similar boring work, and between the 2 jobs I was pulling enough income to cover basics and start saving a tiny bit each month. Deborah called me 3 weeks after the business closed and asked if I wanted to grab coffee. We met at a place near her apartment and spent 2 hours talking about everything that happened, and for the first time in years we were completely honest with each other. She admitted how hard it was to pretend she couldn't walk every time she saw me, having to stay in that wheelchair and act helpless when she just wanted to tell me the truth. I told her about finding the casino video and installing the hidden camera, and she laughed, saying she should have been more careful about where she went. We agreed to meet twice a week for coffee and just talk. No more secrets or lies between us. She was back in physical therapy, working toward getting full-duty clearance from the department, doing exercises and tests to prove she could handle patrol work again. I started seeing a therapist that same month to deal with everything: the betrayal, the near murder, the loss of my business and marriage. My therapist was this older woman who specialized in trauma, and she helped me understand that what I was feeling was normal after someone you loved tried to kill you. 3 months after the hospital incident, Zach started checking in with me every few days. He'd call or text asking how I was doing and if I felt safe where I was staying. During one coffee meeting with him and Deborah, he admitted he felt guilty about how the sting operation went wrong with TJ showing up as a fake cop. I told him his investigation probably saved my life, even if the execution got messy, because without him and Deborah working together, I'd be dead, and Courtney would have collected the insurance money. He seemed relieved to hear that and said he'd been beating himself up about not catching TJ's badge access earlier. He gave me updates about the case preparation and said both Courtney and TJ's trials were moving forward through the system. The prosecutors were building solid cases against both of them, with all the evidence from the hospital, the poison analysis, the financial records, everything. Philip called me 4 months after everything started and said TJ's trial got scheduled for month 6. He explained I'd probably need to testify about the business relationship and everything that led up to the hospital confrontation. Adriana started coaching me on how to handle cross-examination, teaching me to stay calm and not let defense attorneys provoke me into angry responses. She said defense lawyers would try to make me look unreliable or like I had ulterior motives, and I needed to stick to simple factual answers without getting emotional. We practiced for hours with her playing the aggressive defense attorney, asking me hostile questions and trying to trip me up. She taught me to pause before answering, to say I don't know or I don't remember if I wasn't sure, and to never guess or speculate about anything. The preparation was exhausting, but I knew I had to be ready because my testimony could help put TJ away for decades. I found a small apartment in a different neighborhood that same month, 4 months after the hospital incident. The place was modest with just one bedroom and a tiny kitchen, nothing like the house I'd shared with Courtney with its big backyard and finished basement. But it was mine and it was safe, and nobody in this neighborhood knew about the scandal or recognized my name from news articles. Moving in felt like the first real step toward rebuilding my life as my own person. I bought cheap furniture from a discount store and spent a weekend setting everything up, hanging curtains and organizing my clothes in the closet. Standing in my empty living room that first night, I felt this weird mix of sadness about everything I'd lost and relief that I finally had my own space again. The apartment was quiet and peaceful, and I could lock the door knowing Courtney wasn't going to walk in and try to poison my food. Deborah got cleared for desk duty 5 months in after passing all her physical evaluations. She was working toward full clearance but had to start with administrative work while the department finished their review process. We kept up our weekly coffee meetings and started talking about our parents and childhood memories, rebuilding the relationship that got strained by years of secrets. She told me stories about protecting me when we were kids, how she always felt responsible for keeping me safe even back then. I shared memories of looking up to her when she became a cop, how proud I was that my sister was out there helping people. We talked about her sacrifice taking that bullet for me and how she spent 2 years in a wheelchair to protect my life. The weight of what she'd done for me hit differently now that we were being honest, and I understood how much she'd given up to keep me alive. My therapist helped me work through trust issues and the constant fear that someone was going to hurt me. I was getting better at sleeping through the night without waking up in panic, though some nights were still rough. She taught me to recognize my triggers before they overwhelmed me completely, like how certain sounds or unexpected movements would send my heart racing. Some days were harder than others, and I'd find myself checking door locks multiple times or looking over my shoulder in parking lots. But I was making progress slowly, learning to feel safe in my own apartment and trust that not everyone was trying to hurt me. The therapy sessions gave me tools to manage the fear instead of letting it control my whole life. 6 months after the hospital incident, I was settled into my apartment with steady contract work coming in regularly. My relationship with Deborah was healthier than it had been in years because we were building it on honesty instead of secrets and lies. I was sleeping better than I had in years, usually making it through whole nights without nightmares about Courtney holding a pillow over my face. Life wasn't perfect, and I still carried the weight of everything that happened, the betrayal and the fear and the loss. But I was paying my rent on time, showing up for therapy every week, having coffee with my sister twice a week, and slowly building a new normal. My apartment felt safe and the contract work kept me busy, and I wasn't looking over my shoulder quite as much anymore. The trials were coming up and I'd have to face Courtney and TJ in court, but for now I was just focused on getting through each day and continuing to heal. So yeah, that is everything. Nothing fancy, just one of those stories that needed to be told. Thanks for keeping me company for a few minutes. It honestly makes this feel real. Come back whenever you feel like it.